Let's go to round number 5. This was also played on September 1st, 1957. His opponent, Robert Sobel of Philadelphia, was born January 23rd, 1934, and to my knowledge, Sobel is still alive, making him nearly 90 years old. If he lives till January 23rd, he'll be 90. Now, Robert Sobel was Pennsylvania state champion in 1953, and he starts the game with Retti's opening. Bobby with a symmetrical response, knight f6. b3 is the Nimzowitsch-Larsen variation. Larsen taking his inspiration from Aaron Nimzowitsch. This is Bent Larsen, by the way. g6, bishop b2, bishop g7, pawn g3, castles to the king side, bishop g2. This is now transposed to a symmetrical defense, as you can tell, in that King's Indian attack. d6, d4, and this is Tartakover's defense by transposition. Savieli Tartakover lived from the 21st of February, 1887 to the 4th of February, 1956, dying in Paris 18 days before his 69th birthday. He was of Polish descent, Tartakover, became a Grand Master in the inaugural year of the official title, 1950. Tartakover was also a leading chess journalist and author in the 1920s and 30s. After World War II, the Soviet Union took over Poland, and so Tartakover became a French citizen. E5 here is Przypiorka's variation, David Przypiorka. P-R-Z-E-P-I-O-R-K-A, pronounced Przypiorka. Przypiorka. David Przypiorka, a very sad story was his. Born 22nd December 1880, he was a prominent Jewish Polish chess player, but during the 1939 invasion of Poland, his apartment was destroyed, and he moved to share an apartment with another chess player, Marian Wrobel. It was his closest collaborator. Well, there was a Gestapo raid upon the apartment in January of 1940, and there happened to be an informal meeting of the chess players of Warsaw going on. Well, that Gestapo raid led to the arrest of all who were participating, and the non-Jewish participants were all released. But Przypiorka and the other Jews, including Stanislav Kohn, Moishe Lovtsky, and Jakub Rabinowitz, Przypiorka's son-in-law, they were all executed by the Germans in Palmyra. We don't know the exact date of that execution. We believe it was April 1940. So what a sad, sad shame and waste. No wonder players like Najdorf stayed in exile in Argentina. The game here continues with pawn takes pawn, hitting the knight. The knight comes to g4, and Sobel, not playing the usual, goes with queen c1. Normally, h3 is played, hitting the knight and forcing that knight to capture the pawn. After knight takes the knight, and pawn takes the knight, queen takes the queen, and rook takes the queen, the queen's knight comes out to d2, leaving this path open for the bishop. Knight c6 is played and castles to the queen's side, and bishop e6. That's the usual approach, not played in this game. Let's go back. In this game, Robert Sobel with queen c1. Well, the knight takes the e-man nonetheless. White decides to castle, and Bobby develops his queen's knight to c6. Knight takes the knight, knight takes the knight, and now pawn to f4 is played, hitting the knight. Now, more often, we'll see this pawn c4 move. And typically, that's answered by bishop g4, knight c3, and rook b8. Let's go back. In this game, pawn f4 attacking the knight on e5, and that knight retreats back to c6. Better and more common is knight g4. Well, bishop took the bishop here. King took the bishop. Queen b2 gives check. Gets a question mark, but white is slightly better in this position. Queen f6 interposes. Queen takes the queen, and king takes the queen. The king getting a head start toward the center as the endgame is already approaching. 2 minors and the queen's off the board, which is ironic since 2 pieces here are still in their beds and 2 pieces here are still in their beds. Are we in the beginning or are we in the ending? Well, knight c3 and bishop e6, pawn e4, and Bobby thinks better of it and tucks his king back away on g7. Queen's rook to d1, pawn a6, discouraging any ideas of knight b5. King's rook to e1, and the king's rook to e8. Rook d2, ready to double one way or the other. And the queen's rook to d8 now. Pawn to h3 here, pawn to f6, king to f2. Now bishop f7, opening the path for his rook. Rook e d1 was played here. Rook e7, rook back to e1. Some dancing of the masters. Rook d8, and rook e back to d1. Sobel, having no plan, does nothing. Speaking of Tartakover, whom we mentioned earlier as we addressed the opening theory, he was famed to have said that tactics are the chess that you play when there's something to do. Strategy is the chess that you play when there's nothing to do. Bobby here with knight to b8, now pawn to e5. Gets the question mark, the bot calling for h4. You could also do a move like a3, I would imagine. But e5, he couldn't take it any longer. He decided to open this line. But the problem for him is that he's unleashing black's battery on the e-file. So after f takes e5, and f takes e5, and d takes e5, black has been awarded a passed pawn. Isolated, yes, but a passed pawn. It does come at the expense of 2 additional isolated pawns. I'm not sure if that's his best choice, but that's what he played. The bot calling for king e3. I would imagine you can also make way in the other direction with pawn g4. The eval bar pretty close to center here. Well, the biggest problem with grabbing this pawn is that the bishop can be trapped, can it not? c6. And where's that bishop going to go? Everything is covered, except, of course, a8. And if you move there, well, you know, the rook will come get you anyhow. So that pawn had more poison in it than Sobel imagined. Knight e4, rook takes the bishop. I'm not sure if he has to take that yet. You could play a move here, since the king is on an open file. You could play something like rook f8. I guess he might be concerned that the knight comes in and saves the day for this rook. But with this discovered check looming, we can just grab a pawn here. And then, after you get out of check, bring your bishop back, closing this file, securing this pawn. Looks pretty good. Let's go back here. Rook took the bishop, ever the master of simplification. And doesn't that allow knight d6, forking the 2 rooks? Well, that's what was played, to which Bobby responded with rook d7. He'll never have time to play the other rook to d8 because the knight captures. And the biggest problem here is that he's capturing with check. So we have to capture this to super defend our rook. And it's 2 minors against a rook, which, as you should know, generally favors the 2 minor pieces. King e3, the bot preferring g4. Note if white plays rook takes rook here first, of course we can take with the bishop defended by the knight and then just continue as normal or whatever. Yeah, king f6. In the game, Sobel with king e3, Bobby with king f6. I don't know why king f7 would be better. You'll have to tell me that. Seems getting closer to the center would be better, in my mind. Why is king f7 any better? I don't understand that. Well, king e4. This time the bot calling for rook takes rook, which again is answered by bishop takes rook. That would compel g4. And again, you can push a pawn. Let's go back. King e4 was played. King e6. Pawn c4. Pawn g5. King e3. Bishop g6. Pawn b4. Pawn e4. Rook c7. Rook c7. Okay, so I play rook c7. White plays c5. Can I play a5? Yeah, I guess he would just play rook d6 here. Don't take the pawn. Do not take the pawn. I can play king e7. I should be okay. Curious move to me, though, rook c7. Bobby with e4. Rook takes the rook. Knight takes the rook. Pawn to c5. Bot calling for pawn to b5. Even a4 here first would be a better defense, I would imagine. Knight f6. Rook d6 check. King e5. Rook takes the c-man, making a passer. Knight d5 check. King e2. Knight takes b4. Rook d6. Rook b6 is called for. That would be, of course, answered by knight takes the pawn. Rook d6, though. Bishop h5 check, which is stronger than knight takes the pawn. On knight takes the pawn, the rook will take this pawn. The knight will have to come back to b4, and then rook will have to move, and then you'll have to move your knight, and then the rook will have to move again, etc. Back, back, back. Bishop h5 check was played. Pawn g4. King d2 being called for. Bishop back to e8. Super attacking the c6 square. Rook h6. Bishop to g6. Oh! What a move to debilitate this rook. Of course, it would be not a good idea to take the pawn with the knight here. Allowing rook takes h7, although black is still winning in either case, isn't he? I mean, I could play king d4 here, couldn't I? h4 does nothing. Gives you a passer, but it's going to be hard to prove. Let's go back. Bishop g6, containing the rook. a3, knight d3, c6, and you can't allow c7. c7 would be winning, so king d6 has the added benefit of not only hitting and covering, but vacating for the knight. King e3, h4 here will result in a pawn trade and liberate the rook, so that makes sense. King e3 was played. King takes the c-man. King d4. Knight e1. That's going for this fork, I gather. And here he just gets desperate and plays rook takes the bishop. And that's going to be all over. King d6. And with the deficit of a knight, white resigned the game.